My first knowledge of KMC came in 1969 when an elder Harley Rice, a member of the medical department of the General Conference, did our hospital inspection. This was similar to what JCAH does for hospitals in this country. And he spent a week surveying the hospital at Montemorelos, where I was medical director. And then on Friday night, after supper, he told us the story of Kettering. We had not been aware of that before. Nancy and I had lived and worked off and on for 10 years in Glendale. Nancy took nurses training there, and then during medical student days, 1960 to 65, we lived on campus. I externed at Glendale, then interned, then did some residency time there. Mr. Nelson was the administrator of the hospital at that time, and we learned to truly love him. He was a marvelous person, very hospitable, treated the student nurses with great respect and kindness, and he won his way into our hearts. In 1969, I was nearing the end of my term in Mexico, and I wanted to finish my surgical residency, which I had interrupted to accept the call to Mexico. In those days, it was very hard for a Seventh-day Adventist to do a surgical residency because of obligatory Sabbath activities. And Kettering had its own surgical residency program and was the only Adventist program outside of Southern California. So I wanted to finish the training. We felt that any hospital that Mr. Nelson was leading would probably be a good place to go, and that was our reason for going. So we came in the winter of '69. I applied for the residency spot, interviewed for that, and they kindly accepted us. So we moved here in the end of June 1970. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, like June 26, 1970, with all our possessions in our station wagon, and the medical education at that time, or the hospital, owned a number of homes down here in the Platte, just below Moraine Farm, and there was a house furnished and ready to move into. And after having been traveling and homeless for a period of time, it was a wonderful reception. They were warm and kind and took very good care of us.
And Mr. Kettering had probably already passed away.
He had passed away in 1969, I believe. So yes, we did meet and knew Mrs. Kettering quite well, both as a friend and as a patient throughout the year, well, the rest of the years of her life. Mr. Nelson had retired at that point, and Dr. Schaffner was the administrator or president of the hospital when we arrived, but Mr. Nelson was still very active in the community and church, and we knew him, but he had backed out of administration. I was born at Hinsdale, and of course was aware of the connection with the Ketterings and Hinsdale in the 1950s that led to their becoming acquainted with Seventh-day Adventist medical care, and my mother had worked as a nurse there. So to come to a place that had the family atmosphere as Mr. Nelson had developed, we had about 1,000 employees at that time. You could come close to knowing almost everybody. And the combination of the commitment to education, both through the nursing school, but for me particularly, the residency programs was a big attraction. It was a place that really made one feel a part of an organization with the goal to train young people for medical careers and to imbue them with a sense of the healing ministry that is a part of our heritage. The medical staff organization had begun with the development of bylaws with the help of community physicians. One of Mr. Nelson's real talents was relationships with the medical community, who by and large were very apprehensive of this new group of people coming into town. He was a superb diplomat and worked out bylaws that are quite similar to what we have today. The president of the medical staff, or at that time called the chief of staff, and the organization had rotated between 1 and 2 year terms for medical staff, but we would have a chief of staff, a chief-elect. We would have the various departments such as surgery, medicine, pathology, etc. And we had one secretary for the department. There was no other paid help, such as the vice president of medical affairs, which is a part of the current organization. The medical staff, to my recollection, had perhaps 200 doctors, of which about 50 were active. One of the characteristics of medical care at that time was that essentially all hospital patients were cared for by their primary care or family physicians, who would follow them to the hospital and render care. The era of hospitalists had not been dreamed of yet. So we got to see the community physicians on a daily basis in the hospital, and it made for a very good working relationship between those of us who were hospital-based and those who were in the community. Elections were typically would run 2 people each time, which after a period of years we realized was hurting the person who didn't win the election, and you were losing 2 good candidates at a time. So we then evolved to the position we currently have of nominating a slate that is voted on by medical staff. The secretary position in the medical staff office at one point in time was having difficulties, and the president of the hospital at that time asked the chief of staff, "What can I do to help your office?" And he said, "Give me your secretary." And Marilyn Slocum, I believe, was the secretary to the president, so she moved over to medical staff office, and with her help really transformed the office, and it was the beginning of a very good era for medical staff. Well, a couple of things stand out. One, again, a group of Seventh-day Adventists who didn't eat meat and a few other things that were quite strange to the community made the community apprehensive of us. At that time, there were not more than perhaps 4 or 5 Adventist physicians on medical staff. Dr. Kenneth Myers, of course, in primary care, Drs. Hess and Soy, Dr. Luthus, Dr. Turner, Dr. Dean Johnson, some in pathology and radiology. But we were viewed with suspicion. I had the privilege of being the first Adventist who was elected Chief of Staff, which was 1984, and that also was the first year that administration gave some paid help to the office. Dr. Emil Peterson, who was a pathologist, began part-time work into what has evolved into the Vice President of Medical Affairs office as a paid position. So he became my assistant. Prior to that, it was simply the Chief of Staff working with the Secretary. And the Chief of Staff would typically have an active practice. So I do recall that as administration asked for meetings, I was happy to meet with them from 6 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. or after 5 p.m. That is not the schedule that administrators typically work, so having a paid physician allowed better contact, I think, between the medical staff and the working hours, membership in committees and so forth. And that has evolved into a very important position in our world today. At one point in time, the medical staff office was having significant difficulties, and the president of the hospital asked the chief of staff what he could do to help the medical staff office improve. The chief of staff said, "Give me your secretary," who was Marilyn Yoakum, and the president kindly gave Maryland to the medical staff office, and she established a very efficient and well-running office that greatly helped the medical staff situation. The operating room suite had 8 rooms at that time. A lady named Irma Nickel was the director of the department, and the open heart surgery program was really in its infancy but was gaining ground. Dr. Richard DeWall, who was the founder of the open heart program, had joined our hospital, I believe, about 1967, and developed the cardiac surgery program at Kettering. The kinds of surgery done, of course, were very different then. The various endoscopies and minimally invasive procedures had not even been dreamed of. So we had a very heavy load of cardiac and vascular surgery. The general surgery with oncology was frequent. One of the differences at that time was that essentially all patients were admitted to the hospital the night before, even simple surgeries like a tonsillectomy or a breast biopsy. And most patients would stay in the hospital 3 to 5 days after surgery. So we had essentially 100% inpatient work. The instrumentation was very different. The initial operating room anesthesia consisted of a blood pressure cuff and a ether machine. Explosive gases were commonly used, so one had to be very careful about any kind of electrical appliances in the operating room. The techniques of surgery, many were very much like they are today, but the evolution of the minimally invasive and catheter-based things are totally new since that period of time. We ran a very busy operating room. Recovery room was adjacent to the OR suite, and the training program, of course, deeply involved the surgical residents. We had 2 each year, for a total of 8 residents working, and they helped a great deal in the operation of the operating room. Dr. Taylor and DeWall were, of course, in the cardiac and the thoracic surgery. The most prominent surgical group in town at that time was Dr. Charles Lovingood, John Taylor, Albert Storrs, and Frank Shively, who were extremely good surgeons, very active at Miami Valley, but as Kettering opened, they came here. Dr. Robert Finley, who still lives in this area and was the leader of education at Miami Valley Hospital, also frequently worked with us. Plastic surgery had not really been invented at that time, although within a few years Kettering did develop its own plastic surgery residency under Dr. Ralph Snyder, and that brought another training program. Anesthesia likewise developed a training program under Dr. Keith Callender that trained anesthesia residents for a period of several years. Neurosurgery was really boosted by the arrival of Dr. Ted Bernstein, who is still with us on staff and who really brought up the level of the quality of neurosurgical care. We had a lot of trauma patients in those days, coming gunshot wounds and automobile accidents and similar cases that were cared for. Dr. Richard Ireton was a very prominent surgeon also. He had trained under Dr. Zollinger in Ohio State University. His skills as a surgeon were marvelous. His vocabulary was much wider than that of many of the rest of us, and he was a difficult person to deal with at times, but he was a good surgeon. Anesthesia, department was led by Drs. Luthus, Turner, and Johnson, and it was and continues to be a very strong point of the Kettering Hospital and Kettering Network surgical program. In my early practice, we had pediatrics. Of course, open heart on infants wasn't done at that time, but Dr. DeWall, yes, he was able to care for youngsters. 3 West unit in Kettering Hospital was a pediatric unit. Dr. Lee Ashman was probably the leading pediatrician at that time. And we also had some pediatric cardiology. So Kettering really was a full-service hospital at that time. The children's hospital in town at that time, called Barney's Children's Hospital, was in its infancy and was struggling, although it has since, of course, become a very strong and a very good children's medical center in Dayton. Dr. Frank Shively was probably the surgeon that I looked up to most. He was trained in Cleveland Clinic. He was an excellent surgeon. He was very professional in all his relationships. He was fast in the sense that he knew what to do. He did it promptly, which made for very efficient surgery. His rapport with patients was good, and to me he was a model that I very much admired and tried to model much of my practice after. In the history, going back to Hinsdale Hospital, which was the first contact the Kettering family had had with the Adventist Church, I think gave an excellent living example of care for people, particularly the polio epidemics, which were rampant in the 1950s. The concept of whole person care, I think, touched a chord with the Ketterings. They appreciated the commitment of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the leaders here to giving care that really cared about people as individuals. We believe that each human being is one of God's children, and we thus have an obligation to them as a family member. There is no one that I would ever be allowed to ignore or put down. The Ketterings did not share all the points of theology with the Adventist Church, although they once commented to Mr. Nelson that should they ever decide to join a church, this is the one that they would choose. One of the points that Mr. Nelson had made with the Ketterings was the need for a real group spirit among employees and the community. For instance, in the design of the hospital, Mr. Nelson insisted on having an auditorium that was large enough to get the majority of the employees in one place at one time, and a weekly or at least periodic chapel service, plus getting employees together for communication, for fellowship, for worship was an important part. He also had stressed to them the importance of having a church close by in relationship to the hospital, because, again, the bond that we have through our sense of mission, our desire to emulate Christ in his healing ministry, involves being together outside of our workplace. And through his influence, the Ketterings donated the plot of land that now has the Kettering Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they also donated the first pipe organ. So that the concept that we are dealing with not only the physical, but the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual part of the nature of patients was something that resonated with the Ketterings. I was also privileged to participate in a meeting, I believe in the early 1990s, when Elder Robert Falkenberg, who was the president of the General Conference of the Adventist Church, came to Kettering and had a dinner meeting with Mrs. Kettering and Elder Falkenberg and a few of the leaders here, just exploring what are the goals of the church, why is it relevant. Another point in the education that was dear to the Ketterings was at one point in the early history of the hospital, they were interested in exploring the possibility of establishing a medical school on the campus where Cox Institute now stands. That did not develop, but they really were interested in the education, and they appreciated the commitment that the Kettering leaders and people had to educating our community, training healthcare workers, training people in better lifestyles, a better way of living, as well as healing their illnesses.
So community health and that sort of
Community health. One of the stipulations that Mr. Kettering made to George Nelson when they were discussing the land for the church was that it was to be a service to the community 7 days a week. Music was dear to their hearts, and a commitment to great music, which was one of Mr. Nelson's real passions. And even today, the Kettering Church is used by many, many different groups, from the Bach Society to various programs, educational programs of the Kettering Health Network, as well as the worship services and other community activities. It's a polling place on election day, and Kettering's goal was that whatever we did was to be of service to our community. Our commitment to education is strong, not only in training of doctors in our residency programs and the school activities, but continuing medical education for physicians, education of patients, having health information, whether it's on the TV sets or brochures that come up on the trays. There are many aspects of the care given by this health network that support and encourage an educational atmosphere. I believe also that all of us from time to time are in contact with people that can be difficult, and there are times I've had to remind myself in practice, this patient is one of God's children too. I'm grateful He doesn't require me to live with that person, but I still must treat them with respect and care and kindness. And I think that kind of a philosophy helps us to remember that every patient is a unique individual and the obligation we have to serve them. It is a joy to work in an environment where the majority of people support that kind of a philosophy. In my own surgical practice over close to 4 decades, I always chose to pray with patients before surgery. Not that that's magic, but I think it was important for patients to realize I recognize I need God's help to do the best job possible. And we have an environment here where one is not ridiculed or criticized for that kind of activity. It's not required that people do that, but we have an atmosphere where people treat each other with respect. Physicians have often commented that even the language and conversation in locker rooms is different here than it is in other institutions. Again, the level of respect for people, the kind of language that's used, by and large, I think is a testimony to our commitment. And that shows every day. We now make a great point of patient satisfaction surveys as a part of our care. And treating patients with respect and skill and compassion goes a long ways toward building that kind of patient satisfaction that now is crucial to our survival. An unselfish commitment to the welfare of others. I believe that was demonstrated very strongly in the life of Jesus Christ. I believe that's a goal that we should achieve too. I think that also recognizing that not only do we want to help patients with the illness that brings them today, we want to help them to find a better life, help them to be preparing for the return of Jesus that is part of our faith, help them to be able to find joy in life, There are sorrows and problems that our patients are suffering every day. What can we do to help them cope with those and maintain a faith and realize that, yes, God's promises are real? I think that's a distinguishing characteristic that we have that our competitors never can touch. And it helps to make us a special place. In speaking of the environment in which we work, Kettering has always been known as being clean, neat. Our grounds are beautiful. Our Christmas decorations are appreciated. And I think it's been a part of the tradition to realize we are part of a community. For instance, the participation in the Holiday at Home Parade on Labor Day in Kettering. For many years, Ernie Neufeld, who worked in radiology, was the leader of that. We also used the auditorium in the basement of the hospital for YMCA travelogues for many years. That was a highlight. Saturday night, bring your family and come to the travelogues in the days when you would have a lecturer and his film about whatever. It has been an environment where, for many decades, has been a non-smoking environment, and we attempt to make it both safe and pleasant and comfortable for people. Our dietary service has been superb. We offer good nutritional food both to patients and their families. And I think it has been a part of our mission to demonstrate in our daily living and activity what a good, healthful environment is like. Mr. Nelson was an expert woodworker. This was a hobby with him. Some may realize he personally built the speakers' podiums in the Kettering Church that even exists today. He enjoyed artistry of any kind. He also was a very strong advocate that all of his employee family would get out into the community. He resisted having any kind of housing development close by for employees. He wanted Kettering workers to be out, to be members of their community, to disperse, to participate in service clubs, to participate in the cultural activities as well as the activities to help less fortunate people, such as food banks and things like that. This was a very strong part of his mission. That have been pillars that, by and large, are part of our culture even today. George Nelson was a man who was both humble but very intelligent and a born leader of people. He led by example. His goal of establishing a culture where Kettering Medical Center and its employees would be a positive influence in the community. He encouraged people to get out and participate in community activities. He encouraged having beautiful grounds, the decorations we have, that everything be done in good taste and carefully, but of the highest possible quality. He functioned in an era when the administrators of Adventist hospitals were a part of the ministerial staff and were paid on the same pay scale as pastors. But he put his whole life into this and creating an ambiance where people would realize they were coming into an environment where they were cared for as people. They were valued, they were respected, and they were always treated with compassion. And I believe that continues to be a goal of our network. Each patient, each family member who touches us should come away with the realization something special has happened. I believe that Mr. Nelson not only had very high standards, he personally lived what he advocated. He did have a talent for identifying people who could share a vision, and his ability to build a team from scratch was remarkable. The team that he brought from Glendale included 5 or 6 individuals. The chief of nursing, chief of dietary service, Mr. Paul Reichert, who was his chief financial officer, and perhaps 1 or 2 others. But from that, he rather quickly built a cadre of workers, primarily from this community, some who were brought in from other places with their experience. But he was able to build a group of people, and his ability to communicate well with people, the chapel services, not chapel in the sense of a religious exercise, but a chance for people to get together to understand what are the goals. Administration communicated, I think, very clearly to the people working what their goals were, and then gave them the support to achieve those goals. And Mr. Nelson was an excellent team builder. And just watching his daily life, again, his integrity, his ability to relate to people who at times were even hostile to him. His early experiences with the County Medical Society were challenging. He had the ability to go into such an environment and help people to realize that he would be an asset to their community, not someone to fear. The emergency room in 1970 consisted of a bay with curtains and perhaps room for 5 or 6 patients at a time. The ER group professionally was run by a group of 2 surgeons, George Lechner and Cal Edwards, an internist, Raymond Beitzel, and a pathologist, Allison Palmer Brody, who had the contract for emergency room. Much of the actual work in ER was done by the surgical and medical residents in the hospital who would moonlight. During the years since then, of course, technology has changed immensely to the point where the emergency services now are a major part of the hospital. In the mid-1980s, I believe, the emergency medicine program developed. Kettering has been a strong part of that, although it's through the Wright State University. But today we have multiple physicians on call at each one of our hospitals every day, and emergency medicine has evolved into a separate specialty several years ago and to a major part of the hospital activity. Very, very different from what it was 45 years ago. She did, yeah. Her husband, Henry Brody, taught at the college, and his other unique talent was the ability to make very nice music on a saw, a hand saw, with a bow, like playing it like a violin. But he many times gave special music for various occasions by playing on his saw. The anesthesia department and its training program also might deserve a mention. We trained residents probably over a period of 10 or 12 years, many of whom are still part of the anesthesia staff here at Kettering. I know that we have graduates at Green Hospital, and there are some others throughout the community. But that was a very strong program in the early days. Mrs. Kettering was a most delightful individual. One of the things I remember about the time when she was in good health, she enjoyed traveling a great deal, and the gift shop at Kettering Hospital had a back room that had exquisite gifts, many of which were things that she had purchased when she traveled to other countries. It was sort of like a super Saks Fifth Avenue for gift purchasing. And she added a lot to the decor, and she had some strong opinions and very good taste in choosing how would the hospital appear with the decorations, and always had very high standards. Mrs. Kettering had both very good personal taste and strong opinions as to the ambiance and decor in the hospital, and she had a great deal of positive input into making our hospital a place that was visually attractive and adhered to the highest standards of good taste in decor and ambiance.